Hi Year 9, today we are still looking at the same text as last lesson, Half a Yellow Sun, and we're going to be finishing the questions that we didn't cover last lesson, so questions 3 and 4. So just to quickly recap from last lesson, language paper 1 section A has 4 questions. Question 1 is your 4-mark retrieval question. Question 2 is an 8-mark question where you analyse language as much detail as possible. And now we're going to be doing question 3 and 4. So you've covered how to answer each question in language paper 1 section A. What I'd like you to do for the do now is watch the video that you're hopefully watching now and reread the extract for Half a Yellow Sun. Like lesson, I'm asking you to pause the video before we move on to the next section. So please pause the video now to complete your do now. Right, hopefully you've paused and reread the extract. So for task 1, what we're going to do is learn a little bit more about structural devices. So question 3 asks you to analyse purely structural devices, no language analysis. So what I thought would be useful to do, because structural devices students tend to find quite hard, because it's not as obvious as language devices, is recap structural devices. So you'll see a PowerPoint uploaded. What I want you to do is open that PowerPoint up. I spent about a slide per structural device. What you do is read through them and recap. When you've done that, write the definitions for the structural devices here. Write about a sentence for each structural device explaining what they are and what they do. So you might even want to do that as you read through the PowerPoint. So that's what you need to do for task 1. So please pause that before moving on to task 1. Hopefully you've done task 1 now, and we're starting back up for task 2. So task 2, we're having a look at question 3. Question 3 is a purely structural question. With every question 3, you'll be looking at the whole source of the text, because it will want you to analyse the beginning of the text and how the structure progresses, so where the story goes and why. They might tell you where the extract is within the novel, which will be very useful. That will help you analyse structure and how the novel opens and how the writer builds it. Again, like with question 2, they have the you could write about section. So it says you could write about how the writer focused attention at the beginning of the text. I would always start question 3 talking about how the text opens, because then it gives you a jumping board off to show progression. Then it says how the writer changes focus on the source and how it develops. So focus could be zoom in. The text might start by zooming in to a particular aspect or describing something in great detail. That's a structural effect with changing focus. It could zoom out. That's another structural effect. It could change narrator and perspective. It could also change, let's say your character walks from outdoor to indoor or from indoor to outdoor. That is a change of focus. So there's things you can write about that. Any other structural features that interest you, that could be any of the things that you've covered in task 1. So your foreshadowing, that's a really great structural device to think about. So what you're going to do now is plan how to answer that question. Miss Finesse has kindly written a planning grid for you and the beginning of a sample answer, so I'll explain that to you now. You want about 3 P's for this section. Your P's might be slightly smaller than your language analysis, but that's not necessarily the case. So what they want you to do is describe very briefly what happens at the beginning. So focus on Auntie giving information to her nephew about his new job, and he listens patiently but cannot fully take it in. So that's what's happening. Do not describe everything in great detail. Briefly outline what's happening. Then Mum's explained why this is interesting. There's a contrast between the new and old life. Sensory description showing it's overwhelming. Evidence you might want to put a slight quote in. The saliva left her mouth with a sucking sound is juxtaposition. The bushes were shaped like slender hills, the lawn glistened like butterflies above. So it's almost like this overwhelming detail of what's happening in the current and then his past, and the two just don't align up. And then it progresses to Auntie recounting an anecdote and establishes the divide between rich and poor. So you've got overwhelming sensory detail here, you've got a contrast, and now you're furthering that juxtaposition between rich and poor. So the beginning of the text has started with a bit of a contrast, and the middle of the text is just widening, like a crack becoming deeper and deeper, a crack in the ground and the earth splitting. That's kind of how it's going with that bit. This one's purposely been less blank for you to plan it yourself. What's the third focus you'd like to write about? You could ignore this planning grid and do your own interpretation of it. I'd recommend a guided one. If you're feeling brave, you can do it, but do stick to 3 Ps, explaining the beginning, sort of middle and end as well. I'd advise that's the best format to use. So as I noticed, Mum said there's a sample answer for you here. It's just covering the ones that she has covered in this grid, and you need to finish it off here with a bit that you've planned in here. I hope that makes sense. Read through Mum's example. If you're stuck at all, please do send me an email and I'll get back to you straight away with it. Right, so pause the video now for you to answer question 3 in task 2. Alright then, so now we're going to move on to task 3, where it's a self-assess task. So what I've done here is I've put in some of the mark scheme. Level 3 and 4, the highest ones on the smart scheme at the moment, and then level 1, level 2, the lower. It shows you what grades you're going to be given. So remember, question 3 is an 8-mark question. This is a sort of grade you'll get for question 3, explain structure analysis. Well, what you do is read through it, see where you've hit these points, and give yourself a grade and a what well and an EBI. So that's what you need to do. It's a bit of self-assessment there. So now we know what we need to do for task 3. Please pause the video till task 4. Right, for task 4, this is the biggest question in the paper and therefore take the most time of this section. It is actually worth 25% of the whole paper, this question, because it's a 20-mark question. It is also the only question that targets AO4, which is to critically evaluate. What I mean by that is have an opinion of your own and debate it and weigh things up. And don't just blindly agree or disagree. So what they'll do with this question is they will give you a quote or an opinion. So here's the quote or opinion. A student said, "This part of the story shows that Yuanga misses home. Everything is unfamiliar to him and he feels a deep regret at leaving the village." So that's the statement or the opinion. What you need to do now is answer the question which refers to the statement. It says, to what extent do you agree? So how much do you agree with this statement that the story shows that he misses home and everything is unfamiliar and he feels a deep regret leaving? So do you agree, disagree, or both? Again, like with the other questions, it has 3 bullet points that you could consider. Consider your own impressions, relate how the writer conveys the experiences of leaving the village, and support your response with references to the text. What I advise is not to straight up agree or disagree. You're going to want to do a bit of both to show that you're critically evaluating. So you could disagree, have one counter argument. So you could say, I mostly disagree, but there's a little part that agrees. So I definitely have at least one counter argument's worth of P's in there. So this is quite a hard text, a hard question. So again, Mrs. Furness has written a great grid here with points that attack the question and forward and against. So there's an agree quote and a bit of analysis. So that would be Mum's points, and that would be her evidence, and she explain a bit more on that. So everything is unfamiliar. There's a quote for it, and there's actually a quote against it. So that's you agree and that's you disagree. If you notice, Mum's highlighted things like juxtaposition, symbolic, and repetition. So with question 4, you're not limited to just language or just structure. You can cover them both, but you need to be critical and analyse and answer to what extent you agree. So you can use structural or language devices in this particular question, if that makes sense. So you can use Mum's planning grid for this question, or you can write your own if you're feeling particularly brave. But Mum has written the beginning here for you. I agree to a slight extent. that there is a brief moment when Joango misses home, when he wished to be back there now, in his mother's hut under the dim coolness of the thatched roof. But this fleeting moment of nervousness arises not from real homesickness, but from an understandable culture shock and a sheer alien wondrousness of the town in which he is about to begin the new chapter of his life. So what I'd recommend is read through that and see how Mam's writing that and how the piece has been laid out. What you can do then is please continue the answer below. So Mam started it off for you, and then write the rest of it there. Spend the rest of the lesson on your planning and writing of your piece. Remember, this is a 20-mark question, so you are going to be spending a decent amount of time on it, and you want about 4 or 5 Ps. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, please do email me as always. I'll be going through your OneNote, but if you want me to get to you directly, do email me, because I get a little bling sound and that alerts me someone's needing some help. Brilliant, thank you.